Ladies and gentlemen, we will now have a session of questions and answers. And individuals may kindly, there'll be a mic given to you, individuals may kindly announce who they are and thereafter ask the question. Be brief, please. Okay, H.E. Marshal Krishnaswamy, yes.
Very, very powerful. Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's a very powerful delivery I haven't heard for a long time. I have one query, that is, where do we stand for energy? There is all this requirement of expectation where we are going and what we should be doing. They all require energy from somewhere or the other. Just sunshine alone won't do. Fossil fuel have a limitation. Is there any study being done on what kind of energy requirement are to meet all these expansion that we're talking about? Manufacturing, production, you name it all. And of course, bringing people in. The other part is water. And it's a very vexing issue. Today we have floods, but there isn't enough drinking water. But what is this national strategy that we visualize on these two counts, energy and water? Thank you.
So I think that's a very important question to my mind. And first of all, it's important to understand that we've not carbonized the world. We've accounted for only 1.3% of the total carbon space available. Logically, on a per capita income basis, we should be entitled to about 17.5% carbon space. But as we grow, urbanize, with 500 million more people getting into the process of urbanization, as we become a manufacturing nation, India will become the third biggest polluter in the world. And therefore, it's important that India takes the lead, as I said in my talk, to be the first country in the world to manufacture without carbonizing. And it's important to understand that even if we do all our electricity is renewable, that is only 20% of the energy. That is, electricity is only 20% of the energy. And what you said is very critical, that balance 80% is in the other sectors. It's refinery, it's steel, it's cement, it's fertilizer, it's long distance transport, it's 80% of the energy. And that 80% of the energy we import worth about 200 billion worth of fossil fuel to keep our refineries, fertilizer for our steel, cement. $200 billion. What the Prime Minister has said is, in his Independence Day address, is that by the time we become 100 in 2047, we should be an exporter of energy, not an importer of energy, and an exporter of energy. And no other country in the world is better poised to do that than India. And that is simply because India is climatically blessed. The only other country which in climatic condition can compete with India is Saudi Arabia. No other country in the world is climatically blessed, and no other country has the landmass which India has. And let me tell you, China is no competition for us in this field. So the challenge is for India to actually become a global champion in renewable, use the renewable to crack water, use the process to become a global electrolyzer manufacturing processor, and actually be a biggest global manufacturer of green hydrogen. Produce green hydrogen and in its liquefied form, ammonia, export green hydrogen to the world. This opportunity which India has, no other country in the world has. And the cost of a green hydrogen right now is about $4.5 per kilogram. The challenge is to bring size and scale and to bring it down to about $2 per kilogram in the next 3 years and bring it down to $1 per kilogram by 2030. The challenge there is that countries which have been the biggest advocates for laissez-faire and globalization, like United States of America, are advocating heavy protectionism now. Their Inflation Reduction Act is the most protectionist piece of literature ever written to promote domestic manufacturing of green hydrogen in their country. And therefore, to my mind, India should argue and say that it should open out for trusted partners, including Quad partners. But green hydrogen, to my mind, is the biggest opportunity to make your refineries steel, because 2026 Europe will put border taxes. You will not be able to export steel to Europe. And therefore, India's got the size and scale to be able to convert that balance 80% into green energy.
Marshal Verma, Noor Verma, yes, you'll come back. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for such a brilliant talk. And I must say that your book, India 2.0, when one reads it, you really feel encouraged. My question pertains to providing a very conducive ecosystem for MSMEs in India. All we hear since last 5, 6, or maybe more, few more years, growing, building unicorns, okay? All we hear is, growth of e-commerce. We hear of big retail chains getting promoted at the cost of, corner mom and pop grocery stores, as they are called. But, sir, there are 6 crore 33 lakhs, maybe more than that, MSMEs in India, whereas hardly a fraction of them are registered even. And 51% of them, of these, are in rural areas. Access to finance for these MSMEs is available only to 16% of them. So I feel, sir, while we are leapfrogging to 5 trillion economy, providing a conducive ecosystem for MSMEs is very important. That is where our growth story actually lies. Sir, your comments, please.
Well, I'll respond briefly. Which is the sector where India has the maximum number of MSMEs? It's automobile. You know why did they come up? Because Maruti created Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4 suppliers. You can't have MSMEs working in isolation. India needs to get size and scale of manufacturing. India needs thousands and thousands of big companies which will create Tier 2, Tier 3, Whom do MSMEs supply to? To large companies. Where do they get their orders from? From large companies. Where do they get credit from? Large companies. And therefore, India lacks the size and scale of manufacturing in several sectors. And that is why the production-linked incentive scheme was designed for size and scale. But Indians have an obsession, we have an obsession that we want to provide relief for once you have large companies, MSMEs automatically grow. Now, even the production-linked incentive scheme is just designed to bring size and scale. But everybody feels that in a democracy we should assist small. We should assist the poor. We should assist. Without growth, you will not be able to assist. You need large companies to drive growth, large companies to drive Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4 manufacturers. And India needs to fire on all cylinders. It can't be firing only on services sector. You need to fire on manufacturing. You need to fire on urbanization. You need to fire on agriculture productivity, all these sectors. But large companies are key to MSMEs. No country in the world. You look at Japan, you look at Korea, MSMEs don't have an ecosystem of their own. They flourish with backward-forward linkages. That's the key.
Group Captain Narang. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. We used to travel by train. Today, at short notice, we go by air. So I really am excited with the aeronautics sector. India has placed an order for 1,000 aircraft. That means about $100 to $120 billion will be spent in next 10 years. And there's another potential of 1,000 more aircraft in 15 years. So what is your view of how to make a roadmap of make in India of this commercial jet engine fleet to complement our military aeronautics sectors?
No, very clear. We should pool all these orders. I've been a long-term believer in pooling, like we did in LED bulbs. We brought down the LED bulb prices by 10 times, got all these leading companies like Philips to manufacture here. What did we do with electric buses? It took me 110 meetings to get a pooling, 7 states, different standards, front entry, back entry, different seating standards. It took 110 meetings to get 7 states together. We did an order of 5,500 electric buses together for 7 states. We brought down the prices 15% lower than fossil fuel buses. No, you need to pool orders. If Air India, Indigo orders had been pooled together, there's no reason why we should not push Air. Let me first say that Airbus does a lot of manufacturing in India, several parts of it. But I think a larger goal should be in the long run to see that major manufacturing of these companies start happening in India, because the demand is coming from India. That would require a lot of agglomeration, pooling, and working together.
Air Marshal Sachdeva. Yeah.
Morning, sir. Being an economics student, I want to ask you, it appears to be a win-win situation if the nation goes into one nation, one tax. Will that ever happen, and what are the challenges, sir?
The GST has done that.
No, not the GST, sir. I'm talking about all income tax, GST, everything going in one nation, one tax. The PIL, which is actually working in Supreme Court, and the government is to try. Will we ever go into that, sir? Because that's a win-win situation for the government and all of us, sir.
So, my view is that I think we've done a major reform through GST. It's also important to understand that 91 reforms when we carried out, actually we didn't have growth for 2 years, and everybody said that 91 reforms had failed. And then suddenly the growth started kicking in. And I think same thing happened with GST, because it replaced 32 different taxes and cesses. The revenue was not increasing. There was a lot of concern, and now suddenly it's kicked off because digitization of the taxation has come in, and we are using a lot of technology now. And I think we've reduced the income tax very substantially on the corporate taxes. Corporate taxes balance sheet is very good right now in India, because many people do not realize that India brought down the corporate taxes to global standards. And 1,45,000 crores it gave away. That was a huge thing to drive investments into India, which the private sector should actually be reinvesting. But India has done a lot of reforms on the tax front side. I think we should pause a little while for doing more things. Rushing too much without, you need to get into the challenge for India is, we must understand, is a global slowdown. The international financial architecture is today not weighed in favor of emerging countries. United States gave large packages, it had inflation, it pushed up interest rates, resources. What is happening internationally is resources from emerging markets are going to developing countries, to developed world. Resources move from many emerging markets into the developed world. IMF projections are that this year, 80% of the growth is coming from emerging markets and from Asia. So if growth is going to come from emerging markets, resources need to flow from here. And therefore, we need to calibrate our reforms. Calibration of reforms and timing them perfectly is very critical.
Air Marshal D. Chaudhary. Yeah.
So, Air Marshal Chaudhary, part of the retired unemployed youth of today, sir. My question, sir, I hate to drag this debate into the realm which the talk is for today, since the Center for Air Power Studies and...
we can't hear you. A little closer.
Since the talk today is a Jasjit Memorial talk, a doyen of Indian air power, I would like to draw your attention to the aspect of air power. China is a country, sir, which is, given the challenges of tomorrow, and I'm clear and I'm sure China is an understood challenge of tomorrow for India. Given China's amazing ability to leverage its air power from what it was in the past, a couple of decades back, to what it is now, it's a very potent instrument of its national power, and it's very evident in Taiwan and in the South China Sea. And I compare it with India's approach, historical approach to air power. We fought 5 wars, lost 1 in which we didn't use air power offensively. So my argument is that I think in India, we haven't adequately realized air power's capabilities, and nor have we been able to leverage it adequately in the larger national interest. And given the threat that our India's economy rests on the Indian Ocean and in the region, and the amazing economic potential of the aviation industry which you brought out, don't you think I would say the policymakers need to take a more deeper and a serious look at air power, its hard power aspects, its amazing soft power capability that is in existence, and to leverage the potential of the aviation industry? Is the highest level adequately advised of it?
Well, I'm pretty sure that the highest level is fully aware and fully well advised, and I'm myself a great believer in air power. I think the government is doing everything possible, but we must realize that, I think this must be very clear in our mind that the government works on limited resources. And, when we try and compare with China all the time, we must realize that China between 1990 and 2010 actually grew at 10% plus for 3 decades. India needs to do that now. Grow at, and Korea had done it earlier and Taiwan had done it earlier. So when Prime Minister talks about transforming India in 1 generation, it is about growing at 10% plus in 1 generation. Now, if you are able to do that in 1 generation means that, I'm just giving you the difference. And it's important to understand the difference between 7%, 8%, and 10% growth. Because if you grow at 7%, you will take your per capita, and per capita income is very important. Per capita income will go to about 7% growth, will take it to about 12,000. If you grow at about 8% by 2047, if you grow at about 8%, it will go up to about 14,000. But if you grow at about 10%, your per capita income would have gone up to about almost 24,000. So compounding power of growth is very important, very, very important. And therefore, the critical thing is to achieve economic growth. All of us will grow. Air Force will grow, Army will grow, Navy will grow, all of us will grow if we grow economically. And the real national power lies in our ability to drive economic growth.
Captain Tyagi, yeah, okay. Somebody. Sorry.
I'm Lieutenant Colonel Kohli, sir, a veteran, suitably employed with India Strategic, sir. So my question to you, so we've been talking about decoupling effect of China. What would you rate? The decoupling effect of China is helping us emerge as a global power, or it is the natural alliance of democracies, or the convergence of the two combined together?
So, it's not decoupling. It's actually demonopolization. If you look at the top 25 companies, I've done this analysis of United States, the top 25 tech companies, 95% plus production comes from China. 95% plus. Now, we must understand this. This has happened because of geopolitics, Kissinger's visit to the United States, and, leading diplomatic experts are sitting here. They'll tell you better. America cozied up to China. Secondly, China became a very productive economy. Don't blame them for that. They became a highly productive economy. They were able to produce at the lowest cost. When 2,000 parts in an Apple phone get assembled, you have to get the highest quality at the lowest price. Highest quality at the lowest price. We must do this in India. Don't talk about decoupling, de-risking, demonopolizing unless we don't do it in India. That is the challenge before us. That has started to happen now. We need to push the button more and more. And we are doing this with the Apple phones now. I think we need to just create the right climate for The more you do it, you will see that India will become the least cost producer. It needs you to improve your ports. It needs you to scrap your lots of huge number of rules, regulation, procedures, paperwork, acts, laws, which we have built up during the socialistic era. Just scrap them. And India will become the least cost producer. But it requires a huge, huge, huge push at both political, administrative levels and bureaucratic level, and a change of mindset. No, let's not blame China. It's we, the minute we produce quality stuff to that. So you start with assembling, then you start doing components. It's a 5-year-long process. The global value chains take you 5 to 6 years to build up. That is what we need to do. And we need to be very, very clear about our tax policies on this, because the import component which has to come in should not be taxed, because then you're making the final product expensive. And everything needs to be ease of doing business. You know, future investments from USA will not go to China. That is my belief. But if you look at major companies, you look at Dell, you look at many other companies, they still do 95% of their production from China. They're looking for alternatives, but they will not produce at higher costs. So we have to ensure that we are able to do that at the lowest cost. There's a monopoly. You have to break that monopoly.
Okay, last 2 questions. One by Mr. Parthasarathi. Yes, Ji Parthasarathi.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak to you here. I have a very specific question. Speak into the mic.
Mic a little closer.
I have a very specific question. We are talking about industrial development. Industrial development means the electronics industry in this day and age. Some 12 years ago, when I was in Taiwan, I was given the impression that we were moving ahead on that field. I must admit I have a vested interest in this because my daughter designs semiconductors in America and not here. Why we get a lot of hope about Taiwan, and we've heard that about building the semiconductor industry here. One question, why have we gone so slow? And second, what went wrong? Because we were expecting, you know, a large Taiwanese-style production unit here, and that we would really be in the forefront of the electronics industry. And today's world in industry, you would agree, is electronics.
Semiconductor, yes.
No, so semiconductor is a complex area, and I think it'll require a whole day to tell you, and I think there's a very fascinating book which has just come out, and if you give me your address, I'll send it by Chris Martin on on the semiconductor and how. The important thing about semiconductor is that, you know, how did Taiwan build it up? Let me tell you, this guy who was the second, you know, the chief of Intel was retiring, and the number 2 was a Taiwanese guy who was to be made the CEO of Intel, and he was not made the CEO. And he was from Taiwan. He went back to Taiwan, and he created TMSC there. And he brought in the size and scale, and he brought the nanometer down to low levels, up to 8 meters, and that's how Taiwan became a big manufacturing nation. Now, some of these things take time. The semiconductor policy has just been rolled out. Secondly, they require a huge amount of capital, massive capital investments. So many states, for instance, if you look at the new ventures which Intel and all are, Qualcomm and all are putting up in USA, they are virtually being subsidized by the United States of India. Micron is coming in for design here, but I think we are on the right track. We have got the right policy framework. It'll take a little time, but we'll be there. It's a matter of time. But we do, incidentally, we do a lot of fabulous manufacturing here, and we do a lot of design work in India. Bangalore, Hyderabad do a lot of work on design.
Okay, lots of hands up, but one last question. Man in blue uniform. Yes, okay. Yes.
Good morning, sir. Air Vice Marshal Sri Kumar.
Yeah.
Charged up definitely. Started my student career listening to GP, now to AK, G Parthasarathi to Amit Khan. Generation next is...
He's our guru.
Absolutely, sir. CPCC to Nidhi Aayog. Generation next is very well charged up, sir. Whether it's a God's own country statement to Amardakal. My question is, still why are we requesting for a permanent membership for UN Security Council? Why can't we demand a permanent membership in the UN itself? Or let us make parallel UN. Your comment, sir.
Well, there are many more people who are more, Mr. Parthasarthi and all are better equipped to answer this. I'm not a, I have not dealt with UN, I'm not a foreign service member, but I think, while we are attempting to do all this and while we are doing this, one must realize that the post-World War II institutions whether it's the United Nations or you look at the multilateral development banks, they were designed for another era. They were designed for the post-World War II, the post-Bretton Woods period. They were not designed for an era where there would be sustainable development goal targets, there would be climate finance would be necessary, or there would be a very key role for the emerging markets, or there would be African Union, some of these things. So I think they need to be redesigned, and that's an evolutionary process. There's a vested interest of Security Council members, and it's not easy to get that. They had never envisaged a Security Council where there'll be prolonged war with one of the Security Council members involved for 1.5 years now. And therefore, I think several of these institutions are in a state of flux. They've become unwieldy, they've become unmanageable, and I think starting off with the multilateral development banks, you will see institutionalized changes. Some of these changes will emerge through G20, which is far more ambitious, which is far more compact, which is far more tighter. So if the Security Council and United Nations become undeliverable, as you are seeing them during the course of the European war, you will see other institutions which are more flexible playing a more critical role. So G20 plays a critical role. Now with India proposing that AU, the Prime Minister proposing that AU should also be a member, that means you'll have almost 90% of the members in G20, 90% of the 85% of the population and 90% of the GDP in G20. And then my view is that over a period of time, G20 will start playing the role which Security Council should have actually played. So there'll be a huge, we are in the process of evolution of many of these institutions.
Okay, so now we come to the end of Q&A session. I request Dr. Baru, 2 minutes, sir.
No,
Yes.
1 minute.
Yes.
As a chairman's privilege, I'll have the last word.
Yes.
I think what the Q&A did was allow us to get Mr. Kant to also speak on challenges. So that, the topic was opportunities and challenges, and we had a gung-ho presentation of the opportunities. But if you look at the kind of questions raised, there are a lot of challenges, and I think we must recognize that. What I just wanted to say was, when you mentioned 10% growth, it reminded me of a meeting with Prime Minister Vajpayee. In 2000, Mukesh Ambani gave a presentation to Prime Minister Vajpayee, 25 or 30 PowerPoint slides over a 1 hour on how India can achieve 10% growth over the next decade. This was the year 2000, beginning of the 21st century, and they said 2010, next 10 years, we can do 10%. And gave an elaborate gung-ho presentation like Mr. Khan's very excited speech we heard this morning about all the great things India is doing. At the end of that, Prime Minister Vajpayee, as all of you know, he was a man of great silences. And everybody was waiting to hear him, and took a few minutes and he said, "Acha, to ye hoga kaise?" And the meeting ended with that question. I think Mr. Vajpayee asked the big question, that we are going to be the world's third largest economy, but we are still, in per capita terms, 147 out of 189. It's a long journey. And I guess we need that 10% growth, and we hope people like Amitabh in government will answer that Atalji question, ye hoga kaise? Thank you.